Welcome to the Bindery. My name is Evelyn and I write books and I make books. Today I am making a new bullet journal for the second half of 2026. I'm starting with printing some very faint dot grids onto this lovely paper. This is a premium paper at 70 pounds, so not super heavy, but a little bit nicer than your average printer paper. With the first side printed, I have to go through and print the second side, and then I can get ready with the making of the book. I'm going to start by separating out the papers into stacks of 4, and then I can fold them into signatures. I have 8 signatures with 4 pages each, and that gives me a total of 128 pages if I have done my math correctly, which I'm a writer, not a mathematician, so feel free to double check. I'm going to make sure these signatures are creased very nicely with my bone folder, and I must say it is extremely satisfying to fold a paper so nicely. I will note that I did make a mistake at this point. The dot grid that I printed is ever so slightly not all the way edge to edge. There are tiny margins around the top edge, and I accidentally got some of these signatures upside down so that they don't line up perfectly in the final product. It's extremely minor, but it is something to note for future projects. I have pulled out some fabric that I got a while back. These are simple quilting cottons that I got from Hobby Lobby absolute ages ago, and I am going to use one of them to make a book cloth. I love the green polka dot, but it's not quite the vibe I'm going for, so I'm going to use this vintage map fabric and make some book cloth. First things first, though, a bit of ironing. To make the book cloth, I am going to be using some heat and bond and some tissue paper to add some stiffness to the fabric and make sure that it doesn't fray when I am cutting things out. However, this heat and bond is probably 20 years old at this point, and it has rather gone past its prime, shall we say. There are some wrinkles in the final product that wouldn't be there otherwise, and I have since purchased new heat and bond and will be using that for future projects. I'm going to start by gluing it down very lightly with the heat through a pillowcase, just so I don't scorch anything. This will tack the heat and bond down, and then I can go in and be more precise with a slightly cooler temperature. After the book cloth is made, the heat and bond and the tissue paper, it is time to cut out the actual book boards. I am using 8.5 by 11 paper, which I have then folded in half. So this is not a true A5 notebook. It is ever so slightly larger, which means that I have to make custom-sized book boards and go from there. I think it worked out rather well with the sizing. They are just the right size and have ever so slightly enough overhang for the tops and bottoms to look quite nice, I think. I did make the mistake of cutting the bookboard by hand. My hands do not do well with that sort of pressure on them, so at some point I break out the paper cutter off camera and cut a bit more precisely and with less joint damage. Now it is time to figure out the best placement for the cover boards on the fabric. I am doing my best to get the bits that are not quite so wrinkly. Getting out some waste paper for gluing, because one of the problems with bookbinding is that the glue can get everywhere if you're not very careful. Now to glue the edges down on the book boards, and then I can press everything. Make sure it's all rather flat. Just pulling out some wax paper in case there is any extra glue so it doesn't stick. And then it will be time to press it down with a piece of plywood and a brick. I think these came out rather nicely. Very flat, no wrinkles on the fabric. It looks quite good. Now let's figure out what papers to use as decorative end sheets. I got this stack of handmade paper from an Archer and Olive subscription box a few months ago, and I haven't had a huge amount of use for them because they're just too nice to tear up into tiny pieces for junk journaling. So I think bookbinding is probably a perfect use. I'm going with these light green, highly textured papers that have a nice matching color to the fabric. and will look very well indeed. Just cutting them down a little bit to fit, and then on to gluing. Before I glue everything down, I did want to add an elastic strap to the back cover, so I need to punch that in now before I have glued on the decorative end papers. This will both secure the elastic and hide the tail ends. Now comes time to actually start the sewing process. This means getting the stitching holes cut or punched into the covers and making sure that the stitching holes on the signatures are all lined up. I made a mistake on this one and I punched the holes on the back cover on the same side as the elastic when it was meant to be on the opposite side. It's not the end of the world, I don't realize it now, but I'll go back and fix this in a bit and then just add some decorative stitching on the back to cover up the mistake. I will be using a curved tapestry needle and a whole pile of waxed linen thread. I am by no means an expert on the Coptic stitch. I ended up with my stitches just a little too loose, so the pages are slightly floppier than they should be, but I think it turned out rather nicely, and I will definitely be doing more of this in the future. It was at this point that I realized my mistake and started over. Just a few more stitches and then some decorative stitching on the back. And this book, this notebook that I intend to use for the second half of 2026, it will be done. And I'm very pleased with the result. This is definitely not perfect by any means. There are mistakes with the stitching and the signatures being upside down, but it is extremely usable. I really love how it looks. It's nice to hold and the paper feels good, and I think that I'm quite pleased with it. That doesn't mean that I will not be looking out for those same mistakes in future notebooks. With that last snip, let's have a look at the final result.